Incredible. Anyway, he unfortunately he changed a lot over the years.
That's cool.
You know,
Yeah.
right. It's quite good. So I don't know. I like stories.
Oh, we do. We do too.
Non-fiction.
Like, hi, I'm Sue. We need to be very nice.
Nice. What's your welcome? Kevin, nice to meet you.
All right, folks. Sorry to interrupt, but
that's okay.
let's call the meeting great. Awesome. Well, let's call the meeting to order. Yeah. And I'll shoot, but of course I should open the agenda email first, but they're just I think. First order of business on the agenda is asking for amendments. Actually, let me actually find this.
I'm not good enough to that.
Let's just, okay. So we have an agenda for tonight. It's got a couple of things on it. Trust with public lands, review the forest management plan, discuss soil analysis results. Anything else anybody wants to talk about while we're here? Okay, then we can go with that agenda. I think maybe we'll switch the order under new business and get to the soil results and recommended action, because I think that'll tie in directly with updates from TPL. I suspect that would be the case. Hayden, I'm not putting you too much on the spot, but let's get that one out of the way first. I don't think there's much we can do about it anyway. So and then we'll have more time, or we can be more open-ended with the forest management plan. So
You remember approve the minutes from last meeting real quick? I'll make a motion.
Any second motion made and seconded? Any discussion about the minutes from last meeting? It looks good when I glanced at them when they first came out. So.
They only get better with
All right, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of approving the minutes?
We'll need votes for people online to.
Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays? Abstentions? All right. Thank you. Minutes approved. Next time on the agenda actually is public comment. So we make space for you guys.
You put it on the spot.
Yeah. On the other hand, you're welcome, welcome to contribute to the discussion as we go along too.
Where is this thought? We just heard about this. So where is the land? Where is the proposed village?
Yeah, it's kind of 180 degrees around us almost. It starts so it abuts the rail trail coming down to the Low River, directly across from the village, goes up over the top of the hill, basically back to the town line with Elmore, across the top of the hill, comes down into the East Elmore Brook and back up the other side, and wraps around by the elementary school and comes down onto Route 15 in the Pottersville area across from, basically to across from the power dam. So it's 730 acres. It covers a lot of territory, a lot of diverse forest.
So is there any trail put in or the public use? Have you already had public input on this stuff? People can see.
Yeah. In the interest of time, maybe we can talk about it after.
Yes.
After the meeting, and or there's other places you can get up to speed, but yes, trail networks planned for construction this year, and other uses part of the forest management plan, which is on the agenda tonight. So cool. All right, then with that, let's move along. Hayden, our next item says status report from TPL.
Thanks, Gordon. I'll start with stuff other than the soils and get to that to lead into the soil conversation. Since we last connected, there hasn't been a ton of developments. We've been connecting with Sinuosity on the trail construction developments, the permitting work that needs to happen prior to going out and flagging the sites. Um, Sinuosity submitted a town permit for the improvements they're making within the floodplain area, specifically on the school property. There's no town permits necessary for the improvements that are being made on the rec fields, thankfully. So it should be pretty streamlined. So Sinuosity is handling that. We haven't had any other major permits flagged. They're going through the Act 250 amendment on the school property right now. They did identify some of the planned trail route through Class 2 wetland on Rhoda Bedell's property. It's one of the two loops that are in kind of the southern section of Rhoda's land behind the school. So both Brooke and Mariah, the Sinuosity folks, are going to need to figure out how to route their way around the buffer area of the wetland, so they don't have to trigger the permit. So that's pretty much that. We've connected with VOREC to amend our VOREC agreement. So we've had information from Sinuosity to help guide that conversation to amend kind of components within the grant. So I don't have any information. I was hoping to share information on extending the grant deadline. That's still kind of ongoing in our conversations. For other materials, we're preparing a lot of the closing documents right now. Our legal team is preparing closing documents for both Bedell and Bourne. So we have essentially all of the closing documents ready to go once we get the green light of when we can schedule a closing, to ensure that essentially nothing else is going to slow us down. For the one thing that is slowing us down, the soil management component, we got this phase 2 supplemental soil report back from Stone last week. I think it was last week or from Stone. That was essentially a report that Stone had to do following the soil sampling that they did in May. So they take the soil sample results that they get back from the lab from that sampling that was done in May and develop this report that documents essentially the findings within the soils, the contamination that they found, and the remediation that needs to take place based on what the findings were. So they tested both sites, the pole site on the community forest site and the affordable house site. They had 9 sample locations on the affordable house site. All 9 sites on the affordable house site came back with contaminants. 6 of those sites were above residential standards for soil, the Vermont soil standards. Residential sites are sites that are currently undeveloped but planned to be residential, so they're going to be developed in some way. 1 of the 9 sites had soil contaminants above non-residential soil standards in Vermont, which means that that one site would need to be remediated or cleaned up in some fashion prior to being conveyed to another landowner, regardless of the future outcome if it's developed or not developed. That's really important to know. That's something that wasn't previously flagged in the first round of soil sampling that has now been flagged. So regardless of whether or not it's affordable housing outcome or a component that's going to be part of the future community forest, this small affordable house lot being conveyed to the town instead, some form of remediation will need to take place. Whether that's all of the soil sample sites or just that one in particular site that has soil contaminants above non-residential standards, we need to figure that out with Stone based on what the outcome is going to be. But that's important to highlight. For the site, for the community forest site, there was soil sampling. They identified that the contaminants are generally around a 10-foot by 10-foot area where the former telephone pole once stood. So that'll involve essentially removing the layer of topsoil that has the contaminated soil, disposing of that contaminated soil offsite at a disposal facility, and then doing another round of testing on the site following the removal of the soil to confirm that all of the contaminants have been removed. that won't take too long. It sounds like a lot of steps, but that should actually go rather quickly. Um, and that'll be done under a soil management plan, as we've talked about in the past, rather than a corrective action plan, which takes much longer. So that's pretty much the updates. That kind of also flows with the recommendations that are embedded within this supplemental phase 2 report that we shared the bullet points off of. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that. I'll just mention before I pass the mic, we are still planning on moving forward with the affordable housing option. It's going to be incredibly competitive with the amount of funding available to develop the housing site. So we're still moving forward with the plan to develop an affordable house, but given the competitiveness for the amount of brownfields funding available through the state. There was multiple projects in Vermont that were awarded brownfield revitalization funding last week of over $2 million, which probably soaked up a lot of the remaining funding available. I don't think that this site is going to require a ton of funding, but there's a lot of projects in the queue ahead of us right now. So I think it's worth noting that right now as we're kind of thinking about planning of what could the potential future use of that specific lot would be.
A question for you, Skilly. Regarding the affordable housing site and the soil sampling and the soil remediation rather, will that have any kind of an impact on the closing for the Fidel and Bourne parcels? Or is that totally separate now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gilly. The plan is to be able to allow for multiple closings at different times for the two sites, given that the affordable house site is now a separate parcel. We have an agreement with Rhoda that she is willing to convey the community forest site prior to the conveyance of the affordable house site. So any type of plan that we do with the affordable house site shouldn't impede the closing of the future community forest site.
So we get help me out with the terminology here. We have a remediation plan, but soil. Okay, the soil management plan is one, corrective action plan is the other. The soil management plan is less burdensome. We can get that to the community forest. We can proceed with closing if we have the soil management plan in place, if I remember right from our earlier discussions. Is that correct?
Yeah, and Stone already has pretty much most of the soil management plan prepared and drafted already. So we're actually in a really good spot in terms of preparing of the documents. What we're currently waiting on, the thing that's holding me back from saying we're ready to close in August, is that the funding to cover the actual remediation comes through the Environmental Protection Agency, the federal environmental, the EPA, and that money gets funneled through the Vermont DEC. So Vermont DEC would like to use this funding that they have available for a very small cleanup such as this on the community forest site. But that funding comes with strings attached. It comes with essentially two other supporting documents. One is called a community relations plan. That's would cover essentially everything we've been doing for the last 2.5, 3 years. So we don't think it's necessary for this specific site, given this is going to be a community forest, and we've been talking about this for a while. The other one is an alternatives document. It's a brownfields alternative assessment that documents alternatives for this site rather than doing any type of remediation or removal of the soil. That be kind of like a green barrier, like planting of shrubs or ways to prevent kind of the public's exposure to a contaminated site on the property, which also doesn't apply here. This is a really small site with a small amount of contaminated soil, and it's going to be publicly owned by the town. So that's And that would also come with additional components like having to do the additional planning, and could actually impact the appraised value of the property too if we don't actually remediate the site. So both of the components that are being that are kind of required under this EPA funding, we think we can check the boxes to have them waived. And Stone has said that these reports have actually been waived by other parties in the past. So it's not like we're asking for something that's never been done before. And I think we have a really good case to have it be waived. It's just DEC making the case for it.
The question
That's what's holding us back.
Question that comes up for me about this is, I mean, it sounds like remediation is take an excavator and either an excavator and a dump truck and haul the soil away and put it in the landfill. Right? It doesn't sound like a whole lot of money. Are there other sources of money we can just get the job done faster than waiting for EPA and DEC and all the back and forth on checking these boxes?
Yeah, I think that we don't actually have defined costs for how much this would be. I think the ballpark number is $25,000. That's a rough estimate. That's a lot of money that we currently don't have in our budget.
Yeah, okay.
And so that's not something we planned on funding for, and we'd prefer to use the funding that's available as long as we can avoid these EPA restriction, the strings attached. So that's where we are. There's not a lot of other funding that's available that would cover this type of work.
I have a question, Hayden. Is the exorbitant cost because obviously the digging part's pretty straightforward, but during transport, does it need to be transported in a specific type of truck? And I know it has to be for remediation, it has to be brought to a facility where it's dealt with. Is that where the cost is coming from?
Yeah, that's a great question, Maxwell. I haven't seen the cost breakdown. My assumption is that you're right. It's probably the disposal fee, bring it to a facility that will accept contaminated soil. It's also all of Stone staff time to conduct the work, and then it also covers the additional costs of doing the secondary sampling after the removal of the soil and a post-remediation report documenting what they've done and the fact that the soil is now fully clean on the site to get essentially a certificate of completion from the state. So that funding would cover all of that stuff.
And Hayden, closing date, any idea now what that might be?
Yeah, I mean, if we're able to get these documents that I just mentioned waived, we could theoretically close in the month of August. We have everything else pretty much ready to go. I know that I talked about this last month, we need to incorporate what the remediation plan is in both the stewardship plan and the baseline documentation report. I think a lot of that language is going to be drafted by Stone, and we could pretty much embed what they write and prepare into both plans. That just needs to get done, and then also go through the approval process by all of the stakeholders, the select board, the easement holders, in the town. So that still needs to happen. We are actually, I forgot to mention that we are holding a stakeholder meeting between the Lamoille County Planning Commission, Stone Environmental, the town. Actually, I'm not sure if Linda will be there or not. We're going to have it be with Lamoille County Planning Commission, Stone, DEC, and TPL to figure out exactly what our next steps are, and DEC talk through exactly what is happening with their conversations with EPA. We're hoping to have that done either this week or the following.
Stone Environmental, Lamoille County Planning Commission, and Town of Wolcott are the four stakeholders and TPL.
Yeah, I think I don't know if Linda's going to be part of this conversation. It's going to be Lamoille County Planning Commission is preparing or hosting the meeting. Stone is going to be there. TPL is going to be there, and Vermont DEC, we've invited them to participate too. It's essentially talking through what I just shared. Exactly what are our steps here to get this done.
What's the involvement from the Lamoille County Planning Commission? Over to you.
They've provided a significant amount of funding for some of this pre-remediation work to take place. They've essentially funded almost all of Stone's staff time and all the documentation costs thus far.
Ah, cool. Thank you, LCPC.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to know. Okay, so best case scenario, closing in August sometime.
Yeah, if the we need to do those other two plans, Stone estimated that could add like 3 months is the worst case scenario of additional time added, which is crazy. So crazy steps that are things that we consider unnecessary here. So that would be worst case scenarios, an additional 3 months from now.
So the critical path is number one, getting a decision from DEC on the documents or from EPA.
EPA is the final decision maker because it's their funds, but DEC is the individual, or I guess they're the folks that receive the EPA funding. The EPA funds flow through DEC, so they're the ones who need to communicate with the EPA and get the decision from them. EPA is the decision maker.
Okay, so we're a step removed from that. Okay, interesting. A lot of places to create for serenity. Okay, so it looks like our closing date is really uncertain, and you mentioned the VORAC grant and also uncertainty about extending the deadline for the VORAC grant. So is that, are we, potentially if we close in November, are we at risk of not being able to spend the money with sinuosity?
Yeah, we don't know that yet. I think I feel confident that we'd be able to get the grant extended given the circumstances here. The soil remediation, we have a really strong case. And I think the state of Vermont would be willing to be flexible around it. We just need to go through the state process of amending these agreements. It just takes a few more steps than what we'd probably like. And we need to pin down exactly what is our timeline here. I think it really depends on whether or not we're going to close in August and what sinuosity can realistically accomplish between the month of August and when their field season ends, which can be as late as late October. It really depends on weather. And then getting a really good idea on how many additional months they would need in the 2025 calendar year.
You guys thought you'd be done with this like a year ago, right?
That's what we budgeted for.
Thanks for hanging in there with us.
Yeah.
It's amazing what this journey has turned into.
It's called back closing date 3 months. We have an issue with the barn property since it's not the property that's being affected by all this soil. And they are on board with emissions.
I think I heard your question. It's hard to hear with the mic, I think, so far away. Your question was that can we close the Bourne property prior to closing Rhoda's property because it's not contaminated?
Well, I know we want to clean both properties at the same time. If we bump back 3 months closing date for both properties because of soil contamination on the Dell property, we're going to have negative feedback from the boards because their property isn't affected by all this logistics and contamination.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Gordon.
I'm just interpreting what Joe was saying. You're concerned whether the boards would be annoyed and not want to wait and might back out of the deal.
Well, it's not back out of the deal, but maybe cause some verbal issue or something like that. I'm just trying to cover all the bases of what we might face in the near future.
Yeah, so we extended our agreements with both landowners. I think in April we extended both agreements with both Rhoda and the Bournes to the end of April 2025. So that gives us plenty of flexibility. So they're locked in with TPL under an agreement until April of 2025, giving us plenty of wiggle room. So they don't really have the opportunity to be able to back out, and we should be able to close by April is our hope.
I was just wondering, Hayden, perhaps isn't even necessary to think of, but with the way things have gone over the many months, as, I guess as you and Kate talk to Borak and continue exploring the amendment, I'm just wondering if asking for extension to the end of 2025 makes sense. So we're not facing a deadline again. And, I'm just wondering if that makes sense.
Definitely makes sense. Yeah, I think we're certainly trying to push for that. We're trying to give Sinuosity flexibility. I mean, they're still working through permitting. I mean, theoretically, they could have started doing trail construction on the school property once the permits were done now, like this work season. So the permitting has taken a lot longer than I think they originally expected. It's a lot of additional work that they didn't originally budget for. And it's also coincided with a lot of the other field work they're doing in southern Vermont. So I I think that even if we did close in August, our hope is that they'd be able to put shovels in the dirt in August. But they also need to make sure that they're checking all the boxes with the permitting, and that's still happening right now in July.
Good for those guys.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else we need to cover with respect to any more questions for Hayden?
In terms of the language that Stone is gonna provide for adding to the stewardship plan, is that something that we have to vote on, or is that something that we can just amend? Because we want to make sure that we get it into the hands of the select board, so that they can move on it as well, right?
Yeah.
And that's like, I remember at our last meeting, of course, we were hoping that that would already be done by this date, but we also truncated the meeting schedule in the summer. There's a lot of variables in place, so we understand that, but we're not really in a place where we can really do any action on that at this point. So we're still waiting on language for them to add to the link to the stewardship plan.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to write language when we don't know exactly how. We know how they plan on remediating the pole site, but if we're also including language for the affordable house site, which could potentially become part of the community forest, we should probably have language on the remediation of that site, what that looks like, and we don't have an answer to that yet. So yeah, well, we should probably figure out exactly how that plays out. I don't actually even know what steps we should take, whether or not we work with whoever on the committee is available over the course of the next month to implement that language into the stewardship plan. It will definitely need to go to the select board for approval. And all they really need to approve is that component of the plan. They don't have to read the whole thing again. But it certainly needs to go through the stages of exactly.
We should probably wait until we have that language before we seek approval for the forest management plan as well. Adding to the stewardship plan, I do at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would, but talking through this one, it seems to me like with forest management plan, we should be able to get that wrapped up among ourselves tonight.
Right.
And on.
But I mean, putting it on the select board.
Get it on their agenda.
That's what I'm just trying to clarify. I just didn't know if that all needed to be done at the same time, or if we could push them independent.
Yeah, I guess it depends probably on the select board.
Okay.
And how much time nobody gave us, but for speaking, from my perspective, I'd like to see if we can get things done, just into the total done category, where they're not open-eyed waiting for us, I'd rather do that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about timing. We have, if you guys review the forest management plan tonight, at least the changes that were made over the last 2 weeks, and recommend that for approval by the select board, we could theoretically then send that to the select board members tonight or tomorrow morning. Have them be able to review it for over a full week before their meeting on the 17th, and see if they could include it into a select board agenda item for the 17th meeting. I believe their next meeting after that would be the 7th of August. Thinking about the first Wednesday of the month. We could theoretically then have during that meeting, or if we have to do a special meeting, we can. But theoretically doing an agenda item for the select board on August 7th for them to approve the remediation verbiage for the stewardship plan ahead of a potential closing in the month of August. We shoot from the hip.
But there is time now, good, that's all, I kind of want to make sure that we were all on the same information there. Right.
Awesome, thank you. Anything else? Soil remediation, TPL stuff? If we're done with that, then we can move on to the forest management plan. Let's do that. So is anybody, I'm thinking, now I'm gonna think out loud for a little bit. Basically, we talked, we had, in our last meeting, we had a few items, which, and I've had correspondence with Emily around those items. She has made the updates as requested. What I think we could do tonight is just quickly go through exactly what I requested, what those updates are. If necessary, if desired, we can put the forest management plan up on the big screen and walk through it. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that anybody else would have seen the updated forest management plan. Roger, I know I didn't forward it to the group. I don't know if you did, so.
I did last Tuesday. So
Okay,
I sent the forest management plan to the list.
Right.
Bradley wasn't on the list, but I thought that he was.
Okay.
And that's where that discrepancy was. I did send there was one final correction that we received this morning. So I sent that out this afternoon, but it was a little bit late in the day. I'm working on the, check my email until from the sun.
So let me put this out as, a question to the group. If everybody's had a chance to look at the stuff and we can just approve and be done, or discuss and be done, that would be efficient. Or the alternative is I can talk through the correspondence I've had with Emily and a little bit more detail about the changes. And then we can go into discussion. Would that be helpful for everybody for me to talk through this stuff?
From my perspective, everything that we had asked her to change, and we came to the conclusion of the previous meeting. She's updated the language, pretty much 100% of our requests. They've been talking, so yeah. I'm not sure if there's much else to discuss there, because we already got the thing we wanted to change. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone online have any,
Roger, it sounds like you're saying that the recommendations that were made at the previous meeting were addressed in the update.
yes.
Right. Okay, then I'll entertain a motion to the steps here are, we recommend that the select boards approve the forest management plan for incorporation into the stewardship plan. And they can read it and come back with questions, but I think that the point is that we're recommending that this plan should be approved. So if somebody would like to make a motion to that effect. So moved, says Joe. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Gilly. All right. Any further discussion? All, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? Nay? And abstentions? Passed unanimously. All right, that concludes the business that we have for tonight. Is there any further discussion or things we need to?
Next meeting date at our normal
Second
second Thursday?
Yeah, I see no reason, no reason not to.
About this.
In August, right?
Yeah.
It's a-
We'll have at least a couple absences. Okay, well, by second Thursday, we potentially could have a closing, right? It's not impossible.
And all eyes are on you right now.
Optimistic.
We'll see. We'll have to wait and see.
It could happen.
And did you give a date and time for the stakeholders meeting?
Yeah, it hasn't been scheduled yet. So I don't know when it'll be. We're trying to pin down a date. We'd like to ensure that the DEC folks can be involved. We want to try to keep it a tight meeting too, so we can get to the material that matters, mainly what's happening with the EPA. So it's really kind of in limbo right now based on the DEC's availability. And I'd be happy to report back on how that meeting goes. I think most of the conversations are probably going to be tied to the affordable housing plan, because we have to figure out the funding availability for that and what the outcome looks like.
Blessings on you guys for that. All right, hearing no further business, let's adjourn. Sure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Peace out.
Thanks, Hayden.
Yeah.
Right.